I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Good evening, folks. We are back once again after a week's break. And once again today in South Africa, 83 people statistically will have been murdered. And it's the same every day. But some killings are more than just murder. They're mutilation, they're myth, they're even money, unfortunately. Tonight on Profiler Africa, we're going to be taking you inside the brutal, often hidden world of Muti murders. Now, if you don't know what Muti is, or what a Muti murder is, you're going to find out tonight, that's for sure. It's basically where human body parts are harvested for power, protection, and or for profit. And we're going to really deep dive into it tonight with a classic Labuschagne seminar-style deep dive. That's what we're getting into tonight. And joining me, as always, is my partner in crime now, of course, coming to us all the way from sunny Canada, Gérard Labuschagne. Good evening, Gérard.
Now it's a truly international show. Good evening, Paul, and good evening, all the listeners, watchers, viewers.
Exactly. We are absolutely this is the international era we have entered tonight, Gérard. How was your move? How did it go?
It went well so far. I mean, it's quite nice to be in a place where things happen very quickly. You walk into a government building and 15 minutes later you walk out with whatever you need. It's like really a weird experience. So yeah.
Fantastic. And how's your neighborhood? Have you met the neighbors?
So I'm still in my temporary accommodation. I should be in my own place on Thursday or Friday.
Okay. You got to watch out for those Canadians. You know, it's not not in Kansas anymore, Gérard. So tonight we're going to be talking about a subject which you, as a professional plying your trade down here in South Africa, will have pretty much a unique perspective of that I think people are really going to find interesting tonight, Gérard.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, obviously I was only ever really professionally exposed to when I started working in the police back in 2001. Now, traditionally, there had been the Occult Crimes Unit in SAPS, which is now called the Harmful Religious Practices Unit, and was really, Muti stuff was actually their mandate because it had a sort of a spiritual belief system behind it, so to speak. But it kind of became important for us to be able to distinguish for when we have a Muti murder versus a serial murder. There can be some similarities. As you know, we spoke about people like Stuart Wilk and Muti Boer who mutilated, cut off body parts. How do we know when it's serial versus Muti? And if it's Muti, obviously you can go off with those people. Someone else can deal with it. But if it might be serial related. So we had to build up that knowledge and expertise. And what would happen very often is that detectives we trained or detectives that knew about us would just call us out to these scenes anyway. So we kind of ended up, at least in the beginning phases, getting involved in quite a few. And then, of course, the occult crimes units kind of went for a number of years, sort of just fizzled out and kind of wasn't really operating. And then, of course, we kind of just tended to get more involved in the cases because there wasn't really anybody else really that was freely accessible to provide some assistance. So, yeah, fascinating cases.
Okay, fine. So we're going to unpack it step by step and we'll go through some case studies as well. Remember, if you're enjoying the show tonight, do hit that like subscribe button and the bell. The bell will then remind you when we're posting new content to the channel, whether it's the live stream or episodes of South African Serial or some uncut interviews or whatever. So please do hit the bell as well. If you want exclusive content and early access to content, you can become a channel member. The link is in the episode description below. Or you can just hit the join button there on your YouTube page. Okay, so that said, and also please do get your questions in. Welcome to the chat. Everyone is with us already. We've got Michelle with us. Evening, Michelle. And Fish Addict, good evening. And Marlene, welcome to the show. So deep diving into Muti murder tonight. Get your thinking caps on. If you've got any questions or comments, please do contribute to the chat. Okay, so mutilation. We're starting at mutilation, is it? Before we kind of unpack get into the specifics of Muti. So, what does mutilation mean globally versus in an African context?
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, for us it was about distinguishing between the different kinds of mutilation, because lots of non-Muti people can mutilate the human body. But we also, we see this in non-criminal cases where we, because cosmetic surgery is about making body parts bigger or smaller, and often purely just for cosmetic reasons, not for necessarily reconstruction reasons after an accident or something. So we kind of have disfigured the human body in a non-criminal way for centuries. We have ritual scarring in certain cultures, etc. So that's, I like to almost illustrate to people that the concept of mutilating the body isn't something that you only hear of that occurs in far-flung dark parts of the world for evil reasons. And of course, we have like modern medicine, which is, human transplants, using the organs of one person to help cure or helps another person, heart transplants, lung transplants, etc., kidney transplants, etc. We have, in the French Revolution, they were chopping off people's heads with the guillotine as punishments. Some parts of the world, as I said, they have various types of female and male circumcisions, which might be for religious reasons. And you have some countries where they chop off your hand if you committed a crime. So we mutilate the human body for centuries for legitimate and illegitimate reasons, if you want to put it that way. But sort of when we kind of talk about criminal mutilation, there's not a lot of studies that have been done. One of the few that was done was back in 1998. I think it was in Sweden, where they looked at 20 years of murder cases where there was mutilation involved in the actual process. And they brought out a publication in an academic journal. Now, I don't think in Sweden they have a lot of murders to start off with, let alone lots of mutilation murders. So it wasn't a huge study, but it was kind of like the only one we had for many years where people actually said, let's look at what the different types of mutilation could be. And they kind of came up with sort of 4 different examples or 4 different categories. And I think, unfortunately, when they translated it from Swedish into English, the words that they used for the English versions of the descriptions was perhaps not, I think, the best. So we kind of have the first one, which is what we call defensive mutilation. Now, I think most of us in this channel are aware of what are defensive wounds. So defensive wound, which is something different to what I'm about to discuss. Defensive wound is when the victim is fending off an attack, often by a knife-wielding attacker or even someone wielding a baseball bat, and you kind of lift up your hands and you end up getting stabs or bashed in the hand as you protect yourself. So that's something completely different to what we're talking about now. Defensive mutilation, this is where I said I think the words doesn't really translate into English, is really about disposing of the body afterwards to make it, that nobody finds the body, or to try and damage the ability of the police to identify the body. So you might, for example, either chop up the body into little pieces and dispose of it in dustbins and in the river and in the forest. That's one form of this. But it could also be where you don't chop up the body, but you damage the fingerprints, so you can't get a fingerprint ID, or you damage the teeth, so you can't do some kind of dental comparison. Of course, nowadays you can't really destroy DNA. It's very, very hard to completely destroy someone's DNA. But so that's kind of what we're referring to. The person is doing something to make it more difficult for the police to find the body, or make it more difficult for the police to identify the body. So I think maybe the word defensive might mean in the sense of the criminal protecting themselves from being discovered or the body being discovered. So we also refer to that very often as dismemberment. So the kind of examples I've seen is, people will chop off the arms, the legs, and, as I said, throw them into the river or scatter them in a wide open space. That's kind of what the first type of criminal mutilation is. The second one, I think the name is quite descriptive. It's called aggressive mutilation. And I think, as the name implies, this is someone who's angry, upset. Very often we see this in intimate partner murders where that was at that high level of emotion. And in the process of such high levels of emotion is often what we refer to as overkill. So the person would beat the person with their fists to a complete pulp, or they would take a baseball bat and smash them up completely, or stab them, 150 times. Our research in South Africa has shown us that your average knife murders, there's 2 to 3 stab wounds. That's not a lot. But so when you start to get more, 10, 15, 20, 150, like we've seen in some of our cases, that's what we're talking about, this aggressive mutilation. It's anger motivated. It's often associated with what we call overkill. And it's often associated with either a close, intimate relationship between the victim and the offender, or that there were substances involved, or both. That's not unlikely that they're both involved. And that's what the second type, which is, I think a very easy, straightforward description. Then the third one is they talk about offensive mutilation. Now, again, I think the word is not just a great choice, but really what we're talking about in offensive mutilation is this kind of sadistic mutilation, which is literally torture. So we have, where the aggressive mutilation I spoke about just now would be all over the body, all over the face. And almost if you had to reconstruct that in your mind, you would see someone in a crazed state of mind. But your offensive mutilation, which is more your torture, it's more your sadism, that's not someone who's out of control. That's not someone who's flooded with emotions at the time. That's someone who is taking time to sit down. They've probably been thinking about torturing someone for years, and they get that opportunity, so they're going to savor it. They're going to take their time. You want the victim to live as long as possible in a painful state, because that's what torture is about. That's what sadism is about, making the person suffer for as long as possible. So the wounds tend to be quite extensive, but on their own, not very severe, because like I said, if you go too hectic with the wound, a person can bleed to death very quickly. So you'll find it'll be like cutting someone with razor blades, painfully, but not necessarily very lethally, at least in the beginning. Sticking needles into them, wherever on their body, from genitals to other parts of the body. So it's like this careful, calculated, and when you look at the wounds, they almost look like someone was carefully making these multiple small, painful wounds, where your aggressive mutilation, that guy's out of control. So that's your third type, your sort of sadistic kind of mutilation. And the fourth one is what we call necromanic. And really, this is about necro, coming from the word necrophilia, or necro meaning, dead. And essentially, it's about mutilation of a corpse. And this is more often associated with people keeping souvenirs. Whether that's a serial murderer or someone else who wants to keep the severed hand or the head of the victim or the eyeballs. We saw that in the Velkom case we've discussed before on this show, where the person kept the eyeballs. They kept some of the body parts because they wanted to use them in sort of their own little homemade altar. They kept the skin of the face of Michael van Eck. And so that would be this kind of cat.
Check out the episode, SA Serial. It's you can check it out after the live tonight if you haven't seen it. It's a really interesting case. Sorry, Jared.
Yeah, that was fascinating. And so that would be a very good example of what we're talking about here. It could also be like Stuart Wilkin, who we spoke about before, who cut off the nipples of one of his victims and the external part of the vagina, and then he ate those. So that would be an example of this, because that was also post-mortem. So here it's really about, very often it's the souvenir-y kind of stuff, with exploring. So I had one case where a guy murdered a homeless lady and did the sort of Jack the Ripper thing, opened up the vagina with a knife or a blade, and then put his hands inside and literally pulled out her intestines. So that would be another example of this. The person didn't take away the stuff, but it's necromantic mutilation. So that's kind of the four categories. But the problem is Muti murder doesn't actually fit nicely into any of these. It's kind of a unique thing. Muti murder isn't about delaying identification of the victim. It's not about anger and rage. It's not about sexual activity. It's not about post-mortem removal, although you do get Muti cases where body parts are taken off post-mortem. The proper procedure is, there we go, to be removing body parts while the person is alive. Like as I said, there are exceptions to that. So Muti is really something that doesn't really fit into the sort of Western description of criminal mutilation. It should almost be a fifth type, this sort of ritualized, body part removal, etc. So it's not something that, you can really turn to foreign research and understanding to explain it. Yeah.
Okay, that sets the scene. Let's just say hi. Let's take a look at a couple of the comments that we've got already coming through from folks. First of all, lots of hellos. We've got Darlene, first time making it. Darlene Dennis, first time making it to a live stream ever. Welcome to Canada, Gerard. Loving your channel. So we got a fellow Canadian. So we're picking up Canadian viewers. Well done, Gerard. Look how international we are. I think I'm joining the SAPs. We'll come back to that question. Currently, Sweden has the case of a husband who mutilated his very beautiful wife. Then we've got Leslie, who's been binge watching previous episodes, but first time here. Welcome, Leslie. And then let's just say a big thank you to Brett for your contribution there. Good evening, Brett. Welcome to the show. Okay, so let's then. So I guess next we go into a definition then or should we can talk about context, because I think for our international audience, I think they maybe want to understand some of the cultural context that this is going to fall into.
Yeah, so what's interesting is, when I've done, this is kind of what we're talking about today is actually from a lecture that I developed when I was still in the police for policemen. And then, I've presented it a few times privately over the years externally. And, but I remember when I spoke about this concept, like in a few conferences overseas, I had people coming up to me from China, obviously from other parts of Africa, from South America, saying, we have had very similar concepts historically in our own countries. As I said, from China to South America, they don't seem to be practiced anymore. But so it looks like sort of around the world, this has been a thing at some point in history. So that's quite interesting, that the use of, basically the use of human body parts to achieve something, to promote the community, to promote a person's own greed. It's not something that's just deep, dark, horrible Africa. This is actually something that's occurred, probably throughout most cultures at some point across the globe. So that's quite interesting. And because then people say, but why would people do this? And it's, there's, again, we don't have great academic literature about this. These concepts and beliefs are passed down through word of mouth, so they can differ slightly from place to place, even within South Africa or our neighboring countries. But you kind of have to understand that it rests on top of this belief system that, in sort of African culture, and I'm going to use it very broadly, obviously, there's a sort of interaction between the spiritual world and the living world, where ancestors do play a role and influence your life. And if you're doing something that the ancestors don't approve of, you're like, things go wrong in your life until you appease the ancestors. Like whether that might be doing, a small sacrifice of a goat or some other ritual. I mean, that will depend on the circumstances and the culture. But that there's this interaction that once you're dead, you're not just gone and that's it. Where typically for us in the Western world, once you're dead, that's the end of it. You're not really sort of have any influence on the living, except emotionally, of course. So that's quite interesting that there's that interaction, and that's separate to religion. People often think that, if you believe in that, that's ancestor worship. And I think that's a very misguided, old colonialist type of way of looking at it. You can have these beliefs in the spiritual world that the dead can still influence what's going on the earth, but it's separate to religion. You can still be a fully grown Christian or whichever religion you want and still have these belief systems. They're not contradictory to each other. They're not in competition with each other. And obviously that, your lived experience is more valuable than, say, science, your scientific proof. And that when something bad happens, it's because of a linear causality that occurred somewhere. That someone, things are going wrong in your life, if it's not the ancestors, it's because someone else has cursed you in some way. And that's why I think. But at the same time, if something's going well in someone's life, it's because of the involvement of the spiritual realm, and that's where Muti can also jump into it. Okay. So it's a complex sort of belief system in terms of why would anybody believe this at all?
Let's talk a bit about the prevalence of this again, just to kind of finish painting the picture. How commonplace are these types of beliefs in the South African community?
So I think I think it is quite common. Do people all practice it? Of course not. But I think the concerns or the beliefs of, your people practicing witchcraft is still quite a prevalent one. But how often does Muti murder occur? That's one of the problems, because we don't, the South African police's crime stats don't record crimes based on motive. So you can't go onto the SAPS crime system and Google serial murder and it'll pop up all the serial murder cases, or even domestic violence murder or sexual murder or ritual murder. And there's various reasons why. Who would make that classification? Would it be the person inputting the information on the computer? Would it be the detective? You'd have to train everybody to be able to understand and classify different murders as different types of things, and that would be a disaster. That's the first thing. And secondly, at what point do you do that? Can you only classify something as an intimate partner murder once the boyfriend's been convicted?
Yeah.
What happens if it's never solved? So motive classification is really difficult. So as a result of that, we don't actually have accurate stats. So I would hear about cases that detectives would tell me about. We try to keep some kind of record in the same way that we try to keep records of serial murder. And even till today, I'll hear about a case that occurred 30 years ago that I didn't ever know about, that was clearly serial murder, but it wasn't on our list. So that's part of the problem. So, is it 15 times a year? Is it 300 times a year? It could very easily be either one of those, and I couldn't tell you which is the more accurate. But it occurs pretty much throughout the whole of South Africa, and our neighboring countries. I guess you could say Limpopo province, KZN, and Mpumalanga are probably the highest levels. I can't really think that I dealt with any in the Northern Cape in my time, or the Western Cape, maybe also Eastern Cape. You would probably get it.
Okay. We've got a question. Which we'll come to that actually in a moment. I'm going to bring up some of your slides again so we can look at and just help people just kind of see how you go about then kind of concretely defining it. So just talk us through these couple of slides here, Gérard, and then we'll continue on to some cases.
Yeah, so the definition we kind of used in our unit in the police was it's basically the murder is intended to gather body parts for use in a traditional African potion or medicine. So that also is how you distinguish it from serial murder, where the purpose is for different reasons why you're gathering those body parts, or your offensive mutilation or other types of mutilation. So it is for some traditional African medicine or potion. That's the main simplest way we tend to define it. Why do people do it? As I said, obviously you have to have the belief system to think that human body parts are going to get you what you want. But typically, what is it the person wants? The person wants either to be successful in their business, to get promoted, political power, sports success, criminals. You're using Muti with human body parts to protect them in their criminal endeavors. So very often, that's why we say that the motive is kind of greedy in nature. You want a personal benefit, where a lot of traditional medicine is not so much about the individual's benefit, it's about the community's benefit. So that's why we say, traditional healing is by its nature a positive thing. It's helpful. But this kind of stuff that we're talking about now does not fall within the boundaries of traditional medicine. It's on the fringes. It's the exit. That's why people say, and I've been to speak to a lot of traditional healer societies, and they say, but don't even call these people traditional healers. That's wrong. Just as it is, if you have a doctor who's raping patients, that's not medicine. That's an abuse of a person in a position of medicine. So we should rather refer to people practicing this kind of stuff as witchcraft, and that's from them. That's not my label that I put onto it.
No, which I think is fair enough. And then probably one of the most harrowing aspects of this is the fact that the victim must be alive when the body parts are removed. Well, that's
so that's the ideal. Yeah, that's the ideal situation, that you capture the life essence of the person by taking them out when they're alive. Does that happen all the time? I can definitely say no. And we've even had confirmed grave robbing incidences or theft of mortuaries, out of mortuaries of human body parts. So that is, definitely, something that does happen. I guess these guys are just thinking, who's going to know? How is this person, I'm going to hand over this body part, you're going to know that it came from a living or a dead person.
How industrialized, if that's the right word, I don't know if it is, but there is a bit of an industry, I would imagine, or I understand, around this practice, in that there are kind of killers for hire, if you like, who provide a service to the folks who are providing the goods, if you like.
So, yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of, cops stopped a vehicle and there was lots of body parts in it. I've never honestly been involved in a case like that. So I don't think it's on an industrial planned level where people are every day going out getting body parts and then waiting to sell them to someone. It does seem to be very much I need it today. I task my person to go get it. He gets it and brings it back to me. And if tomorrow I need more, then we're going to go and task him again to go get this body part. So it does kind of seem to be more. Today I have the need. I go out and get that. It's not like they're going to macro and stocking up on a whole bunch. It's not that kind of that I have experienced. That's not impossible. But I've not experienced that. So it's very much on demand. And this is where the traditional healer would typically have his or her go-to person to do this for them. There's very often an apprentice of theirs that's busy with their training that would be said, like, go out and get me this body part and bring it back.
Okay. So there's never been a consideration to kind of look at established kind of networks of these kinds of crimes, if you like.
No, it always seems very, very, very localized. Because also, I mean, why would you need to get up? It's a high risk to get one from Limpopo province if you're sitting down in Cape Town. It's a hassle. You got to transport it, or just kill someone locally. I think, that would be far, far easier. Like I said, and also people sometimes say, but aren't these body parts maybe used for human transplant purposes? I mean, if you look at the circumstances under which these body parts are removed and how they're removed, there's no way that these could be for that purpose.
Okay. Roughly how many cases would you estimate we're looking at on an annual basis in South Africa? Do you have that number in hand? I know in your research, I think you'd referenced anything between 15 and 300 cases per year. I mean, which is pretty broad.
Yeah, look, I would, again, because as I said, tracking these cases is difficult. I would probably say that maybe 20 a year is a fairly safe number of these types of cases to say that we have.
Which come through the system, you're saying that? I mean, okay. All right. So, I mean, should we jump into a case example now, Gérard? Because
sure.
We have, what is quite a harrowing case. And I must be honest, I remember seeing your early presentation. You were talking about the fact that, this is a talk that you give on you've given on a fairly regular basis over the years. And I remember the early version of your presentation. But then yesterday, without any warning, you sent me the update of your PowerPoint presentation. And Gérard, let me just say, I've developed a strong stomach from looking at a lot of the case material over the years. But this one really got me because, it's extraordinarily graphic. And this case that we're going to discuss, which is the murder of a 12-year-old girl by her mother, is a very good example of just how dark these cases can get. So do you want to just kind of set the scene for us here on this particular case?
So this was August 2009 in Loate, which is kind of, I think, north of Pretoria, if I remember correctly, or northwest of Pretoria. And a little girl who was 12 years old had been found on the property where she stayed, found in the morning by her mother, who allegedly came outside and discovered her lying in a corner inside the boundary of the property, naked, and her stomach was cut open. So the police get called out. I get called out. The case was allocated to then Inspector Happy Vilankulu, who was the kind of go-to guy in Gauteng for investigating anything that possibly is Muti related. And so we went out to the crime scene. The National Crime Scene Unit went out there to help process the scene. And like I said, basically the lady called the cops after she said, I woke up and I went looking for my 12-year-old daughter, and she was lying outside and dead, stomach cut open, intestines sort of dangling out. So that's sort of the corner where she was found, just behind that truck. And we got there when we started to make our inquiries, and there was a little shack on its own on the property. And we said, well, what's that? Who stays there? And they said, no, that's the mother's practice. So we said, well, what do you mean practice? And they said, no, well, the mother's a traditional healer. Now, unfortunately, if you have something that looks like a Muti murder on the property of someone who's a traditional healer, you kind of have to go and look into that practice. You can't, although like I said earlier, this is not typically the types of things proper traditional healers do. So we said, well, have you searched that? And they were like, oh, no. I said, well, guys, we kind of unfortunately have to. So we went in, we searched it. There appeared to be like blood on some of the items inside the practice. And then basically said, look, Vilankulu, and he agreed, that you're going to have to take this mother in for some questioning. So they finished up processing the crime scene, and then we left Vilankulu and his colleague to do the interviewing back at the police station. And I think we weren't even half an hour down the road when he phoned us, and he said the mom's confessing to actually having done this.
Okay, I'm going to put up an image of the actual, so a censored image of the crime scene there, of the body, and then we can have a look at pointing out.
So that's the mother doing pointing out, yeah?
Yeah, so just explain for those that are new to the discussion what a pointing out would be, Gerard.
Yeah, so I mean, you get a confession, which is when a person is admitting to the police formally what they've done and all the elements of the crime. But sometimes we like the person to show us. So what we'll often say is, are you prepared to do a pointing out and show us whatever locations related to what you want to say are, and then they take an independent officer, not the detective, an independent crime scene person, not the crime scene people who were at the scene. And this individual would take them and show them where they, in this case, got the knife, where they left the body, where they did this, where they did that. And the police would photographically document it like you're seeing here. So that's her formally pointing out to the cops where she'd put the knife, where the container she'd used to capture the blood, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a confession with action, really.
Okay.
So her motive really was, according to her, is that she had recently become a traditional healer. She said her practice wasn't doing very well. She said that she'd heard that, if you were to kill your own child and use the blood or whatever, it would make your practice more successful. This is probably something she came across during her training, maybe, in this particular instance. And that's what she decided to do. Unfortunately, she was married. She had some other children. She did plead guilty eventually and convicted of murder, violating a corpse, possession of human blood, because that's illegal. And of course, her husband divorced her.
Yeah.
And so what's unusual about this one, sorry, Paul, is that typically we don't actually get the traditional healer being involved in the actual murder. Like I said a moment ago, or a couple minutes or two ago, it's usually the apprentice who's going to do it, or they just pay a criminal guy to go out and commit the crime for them. So this was a little bit more unique in that she was physically directly involved in the process.
Okay. I mean, and the fact that it's her daughter as well, I mean, that's surely not something that's commonplace, that, that Muti would be sourced from, somebody, nearby, a family member, a friend, a nearby community member.
I would say that the overwhelming majority, it's going to be strangers, but we've had another very well-known one. I think it's State versus Mogoromedi, and he killed his sister, an adult person, but killed her when she was staying over, cut out the body parts, and was eventually caught with the body parts. That's how they discovered that crime. So, yeah, definitely we've had cases where it's been a family member, like a child. We might look at another example just now where this guy also, he killed his own infant child. Okay. But typically it's a stranger.
Let's look at some questions. And I just wanted to mention, which I forgot to do earlier, that Bax is monitoring the chat tonight. So everyone say hi to Bax. Welcome, Bax. Thanks for keeping everyone company there in the chat. And we got a question from Brett. Do the victims tend to be a specific gender, age, or race, or is it more opportunistic victims?
So, gender, we've definitely had male victims. I would maybe say it's a little bit more 60-40 female to male. Race, almost exclusively black. We've had one or two that I've worked on where the victim was white or Indian, but overwhelmingly it's going to be black. So, yeah. And a lot of people think that it's almost always children. The reality is, I think the majority of the cases I worked on were adults. I think what happens is when it's a child, it gets into the media. So you typically hear about these cases when it's a child victim. But the reality is definitely, I would say, more adults in the cases I worked on, far more adults were the victims than children.
Okay. Now, do different genders, different body parts, do they, do different things? Do they offer different remedies or, so is a particular body part potent for a particular, objective?
Yeah. So we do see that different body parts have different meanings, but again, the difficulty is, these guys don't all work from the same textbook. So one cannot say This is what that body part means, and it cannot be used for anything else. So that's one that we have to be very careful of. We have traditional healers doing this who are trained in Mozambique, in South Africa, in Angola, etc. So they're going to differ from place to place. But typically, breasts and the fat from a breast would be, attracting female customers. The genitals of a female would be for fertility purposes. Yeah, the tongue of a victim might be used to stop someone from testifying against them in a criminal trial. So, and a hand might be used to beckon customers to a business so that the business can be more successful. So there is some kind of, I like to call it symbolic logic, but again, people come from different environments and can have different reasons and explanations for things. And we even see a blending of, like I've seen a couple of times, blending of traditional medicine beliefs in South Africa with some Islamic beliefs. So we had some traditional healers from Nigeria, which is obviously a big Islamic community, who came into South Africa and mixed the two. So you might have, I don't know if we've got a picture of it, we found on the bodies of some criminals what appears to be a string around the waist, which is very common, with a little pouch sewn into it, very common. But inside the pouch were verses of the Quran. So again, a mixture of different belief systems is also always possible. Okay.
All right, let's have a look. Let's go to some more questions and comments here. Here you go. I'm not sure how true, but I've heard that albinos are also a target.
Yeah. So I must say, in South Africa, I've never worked on a case where an albino was the target, but there was a very nice documentary that was made a couple of years ago by a South African person, Sam Rogers, on the targeting of albinos for these practices, I think in Tanzania. So I do think in other parts of Africa, they are more prevalent to be targeted purely for the fact that there are albinos. But I've never had an albino case in South Africa.
Okay, cool. Marlene says, guys, do join the chat. If you're joining the live for the first time, please do hit like and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to get exclusive early access to content, do become a member. And also that helps us to grow and remain independent. And it's going to help fuel our charge to bring you great true crime content for the months and years to come, really. Did want to say thank you very much as well for your support of the South African serial series that we've been flighting. Marlene says, I must say I enjoy both the formats on this platform. South African serial is very well put together. And, we do get some people commenting on the page saying, I like this, I don't like that. And I think the point is that we're trying to give you a nice range. So, you don't have to have a preference. If you like the live, join us for the live. If you like a solid 1 hour documentary, check out one of our shows. And we've got a whole bunch of great stuff coming up for you over the next year as well. So, thanks for the support, guys. All right. So where are we on to next in our discussion, Gerard? Let me have a look. So, our next, another case example. This is the next case you were talking about.
Yeah, so this was a case a colleague of mine worked on back probably in the early 2000s. And this was, again, it's a bit of an anomaly case. The traditional healer that you see sitting there was directly involved in this. Some guys brought him someone that they'd hijacked, the vehicle of the person. They brought this individual to the traditional healer, and there in this guy's little hut, they, killed him and cut out body parts and buried the rest of the body underneath this carpet that you see everything is lying on top of. And some of the body parts were then put into these pots. So one of these that you see there, that one, I think, although it looks like a calabash, when it was x-rayed, it was actually the top part of the skull formed the bottom part of the calabash. And then they kind of just put resin and stuff like that. But you actually you can see there, it's a human, I think it's a forearm bone that's going into that container. And even when they undid it and they emptied out the insides, there was, teeth and human bones inside that container. So that again was unique because the traditional healer was directly involved in that particular incident.
I do just want to underline for folks who are watching, and we have mentioned this earlier, but this is very much considered witchcraft, as Gérard has said. Can you just reiterate that for us, Gérard? Just for anyone that's tuning in, because it's one of those points that I just want to be very clear on through the episode so we don't go upsetting any traditional healers.
Yeah. So again, in general, traditional healing in its genuine form is about helping people, helping individuals, helping communities, not about casting curses on people or using something to harm people, etc. So the traditional healers themselves would say, this is not what we do. We're not there to hurt people, to kill people, to put curses on people. The people that are doing that are on the fringe. They should not be spoken of as a traditional healer. They should be spoken of as people practicing witchcraft or witches. And like I said, I think it's fair in the sense that, we can get anybody from any profession abusing their profession. I've had dentists who are molesting children who came to their practice. That's not part of dentistry. Psychiatrists who are molesting patients or whatever the case may be. So in the same way that we don't say that Islam is about ISIS, ISIS is a perversion of Islamic faith. It's the same here, and I think we must just give credit, acknowledge that in 99% of traditional healers are just doing the positive things. Now, whether you believe it works or not, that's a separate question, but their intention is to help people. And you'll get that fringe element who decided that they want to use their powers to actually cause harm and hurt people, and that's the little tiny minority that we're really talking about here.
Okay, great. So now that we've done that due diligence, would the apprentices lure victims with the prospect of work, or are random abductions more common?
I think at the point, whatever works. If they think they can get this person to a secluded space by offering them a job, or asking them just to help them with something, if it's someone they know, I think they'll just use whatever works at that particular point in time to get to convince their victim to go with them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Leslie, for your contribution. We appreciate you. All right. Back to then some more images from the case we're discussing.
Yeah. So that's the same case we were looking at now. Now you can see they start to break down these containers to see what is actually inside. And there you can see the middle one. It's sort of a skull of someone. It's put upside down at the moment. Okay.
All right. So there you can see some of the images. I mean, so they're kind of just using it as a vessel, essentially.
Yeah, in this particular case, yeah. And these are the parts that were inside the various containers. So obviously your anthropologist would have to identify if those are human remains or not. I think a lot of these were human remains.
Okay. Now there's this, when we talk about, traditional practices, there's this idea of throwing the bones. Tell us a little bit about that. And I'm guessing that folks involved, who would be using Muti would be incorporating human bones into that practice as well. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite common if you go see some form of traditional healer, they'll use some way to kind of help get an answer to your problem. And that might be throwing the bones, as they say, or it might just be this person speaking to the ancestors to try and find out what's wrong. So again, I'm not an expert on how traditional healers operate in general, but there'll be various ways. And I think it depends whether you are a herbalist or someone who's more in contact with the ancestors. I guess I can say, you can say a psychologist and a psychiatrist have different approaches to the same problem.
Okay. Then another case which we can look at, and this is the one where the skull was found inside the what do you call it? The planet.
Altar type of thing.
It's on the altar. That's right. So I'll. So talk
so this
to us
was
a
case
about this case. Yeah.
Yeah, early 2000s when I was in the police, and we were called out. This was on sort of the Sebokeng kind of area, and we were called out to a house of a possible traditional healer, and there was this altar that you see there, which has been broken down in the meantime. And I don't know whether they had information that these people had been robbing graves, but anyway, they smacked down that altar type thing, and then they found a human head. Now, they confirmed that this one did come from a graveyard. So it was a case of definitely people going to get body parts from someone who was clearly at that point in time dead.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was another interesting one I was involved in a good couple of years ago now, in Toyondo, where we had a couple that was attacked. It was a boyfriend, girlfriend. They were off in the forest being intimate, and the traditional healer snuck up, well, the apprentice snuck up and attacked them, cut off the genitals of the male, the lips of the female. The male victim died, the female victim survived, if I recall correctly, and then handed those over to the traditional healer. And we found the body parts sort of at the back of his rondavel traditional practice in a tin, drying out. And that guy was incredibly successful. So there he is, actually standing there to the right in handcuffs. That's his little private practice. And around it was, you can see there's these things hanging. And in one of the trees next to it, there was a tin, like a coffee tin. And this is where the genitals of the male and the lips of the tongue of the female were actually found. And there was a long queue of customers waiting for this guy, patients. So he was incredibly successful in that area as a traditional healer. And the guy who had helped, would actually linked him to a couple other ones. So that would also make him a Muti, a serial murderer. Just obviously the motive behind it is Muti purposes.
Yeah, okay. And these, I would imagine that this is more commonplace in more rural communities. Is that a fair assumption, or would I be wrong?
Yeah, I would think it's safe to say that the majority of the stuff is going to be practiced in the more rural communities with perhaps stronger traditional beliefs.
Yeah. What are we looking at here, Gerard?
Oh, that's just, this is the house where that altar was outside, and we found the head inside the altar. Just, we just saw in all the windows and doors, there was these smeared markings, which I think just was to protect the house from evil spirits or the cops. Didn't work in the case of the cops, though.
Okay. And then the tools of the trade.
Yeah, so again, as I said earlier, people say to me, but can't these body parts be harvested for trafficking purposes? Like if someone needs a heart transplant or a kidney transplant? And absolutely no. These are the kind of implements that they're using. This was a sharpened putty knife. These paint scraper knives or paint scraper spatulas that the person had just used. I think that the next slide probably might be a different kind of knife. So the weapons are absolutely just not surgical in nature. It's really kind of just whatever sharp knife the guy happened to have or sharp implement he had on his possession at the time. Okay.
You mentioned that albinos, I'm just bringing up a question. You mentioned that albinos are less commonly targeted in South Africa compared to other countries. Does this also include people with vitiligo?
I'm not sure. That would be like the Michael Jackson thing where he said that he had this, where his skin was blotchy and sort of much lighter, but not in a very uniform way. I don't know, to be honest with you. I wouldn't surprise me if that also was perhaps seen. If you wanted an albino, someone with that might also be, a possible target because of that.
Yeah, and Chris also asked, he said he thought witchcraft was illegal. Is this specific to curses? What is the kind of legal position? Is witchcraft legal in South Africa, Gerard?
So there was an act that came out, Jesus, probably more than 100 years ago now. I think it was the Suppression of Witchcraft Act, something like that, which made it illegal to accuse someone of being a witch. I don't know if it made it illegal to be a witch. But of course, nowadays our Constitution protects all forms of belief. That doesn't mean you can go and hurt people and commit crimes in accordance with your belief, but you can have the beliefs. So I don't think it's now regarded as a crime. But yes, if you go and you kill someone for that purposes, like a Satanist sacrificing someone to Satan, that's going to be a crime. You can't stand up in court and say, oh, but this is part of my religion. Because then you can justify anything in from a religious point of view.
Now, not only is Muti criminal, but can also be used by criminals. So criminals using Muti to commit crime. I've just got I think we've got some examples to look at here as well. Just talk us through these. So this is actually,
there's the bones.
That's the throwing the bones. But then if we look at
that's actually from that lady who killed her daughter. Oh,
really?
Yeah. So
okay.
So we would typically find little bottles like these on criminals we've arrested. Now, that's not to say that these are found only in the possession of criminals, but we did know that a lot of criminals would go see traditional healers like cash and transit robbers, vehicle hijackers, ATM bombers, would go see a traditional healer before they committed their crime. To find out, is it a good time? Do they prophesize it'll be successful? And what can they get from a Muti perspective to make them bulletproof, to make them, to avoid being arrested, etc. So we know for a fact that people would go to criminals to help protect them in their criminal activity, go to traditional healers to help protect them in their criminal activities.
Marlene has asked what she's just questioning. I don't think it's an obvious question, but let's ask it. Is it illegal to be in possession of human body parts?
It's a good question, Marlene. Yes, it is illegal. There used to be the Human Tissue Act, and I think it's been replaced by the portions of the National Health Act. So yes, you are not allowed to be in possession of human body parts unless it is in accordance with the Act, which would be for human transplant purposes in a medical facility, university facility that's training, the mortuaries. So you can't have like your old Uncle Johnny's skeleton in your cupboard. Or, you're going to you found a human head, you're going to keep it. That's technically illegal. The punishments aren't particularly great. Obviously, if they can prove that you killed someone, and that's why you have this head in your house, you're going to be charged with murder and, of course, that possession of the body part. But if you were to theoretically find a human skull in the veldt, you take it home, put it on your shelf, and someone reports that to the cops, technically speaking, you could be prosecuted. You're not going to go to jail in that circumstances. But yes, you're not allowed to have human blood. I think it's blood, gametes, tissue, unless, as I said, it's authorized in accordance with the Act, which is not for personal home use, that's for sure.
Okay. Mariana says a friend from Zim told us that the ritual is more effective if the victim is a family member of the client. So there you go.
Yeah, again, yes, no, I've heard that. Sometimes it's one of those things that, it could be. There's a note one textbook.
It sounds like the rules are fairly flexible, who you happen to be dealing with. That seems to be the case. And then here we go, a lovely article where, defying all the odds, Muti didn't help. No, of course it didn't help. But yeah.
No, we've had lots of situations where we've taken these little Muti items off of dead cash and transit robbers. So yeah. But I think where it perhaps is important is that imagine if you are a cash and transit robber or a hijacker, and you go to this traditional healer and you believe that the medicine he's given you is going to make you bulletproof, it's going to make you not be caught by the cops, you're going to be far more cool, calm, and collective. It's that placebo effect, which means you could very likely be more successful in your criminal activity because you are not panicked and freaking out. You think you're not going to get caught, so why do you have to worry? Or, for example, if there is a shootout with the police, obviously, one of the things that greatly affects your ability to shoot correctly is adrenaline, anxiety, fear, all those things. Now, imagine if because of your Muti, the placebo effect is you're not anxious as much as someone else. You're not fearful that you're going to get hit by the other guy's bullets. So you are far more cool, calm, and collective as you are shooting at someone, which would make you more accurate. And so the placebo effect can still have a positive influence on the person's criminal activities.
Yeah. I wanted you to talk to us about this image here because this is, just explain what this is, Gérard.
So this was actually, and I think we did one of our documentaries. We interviewed Fernando Luis. He's now I think he's now in the Eastern Cape, but he was in Kimberley for many years. And when he was in Kimberley, he was an inspector. As you can see on that little piece of paper, it says Inspector Luis on the right-hand piece of paper. And so Fernando was actually investigating a murder that took place in a Steers restaurant.
Okay.
So just like a robbery murder. And he would go around making his inquiries, speaking to witnesses. And because, typical cops, you don't have a business card. So you'd write down your name on a piece of paper with your phone number. And that's what you see on the right-hand side there. And he would give it to the person he's interviewing saying, well, if you hear anything, give me a call. So obviously this little business card piece of paper had been passed on to the criminals at some point, and they'd gone to see a traditional healer who had then said, look, this was written by the man who's trying to catch us. And the traditional healer then, as you can see, put some ash, he made some red markings with a pen, Then he put it inside that left-hand piece of paper, which is the bigger piece of paper, and kind of folded it up into a nice little package. And that writing on there, if I recall correctly, was just Islamic verses. And again, it's that mixture of different belief systems. And this was like a good luck amulet so that Fernando would not be successful in tracing those suspects. And of course, he was successful and they were convicted of murder.
Okay. Is this that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same kind of thing. So it's just a normal, nothing sinister in those verses. It's just verses from the Quran. Now, where that comes from, it's called a taweez, which is a sort of very old-fashioned, traditional thing that if a person, the younger generation doesn't do it. So if an older lady was feeling spiritually anxious or whatever, she would go to the imam or the religious figure and say, please, can you give me something to help me feel safe? And he would write out just verses from the Quran and fold it up and put it into a little package. And that lady would have that as an amulet that made her feel more safe. Like, I suppose you can say, like, some people might have a lucky rabbit's foot, or a Christian might wear a cross because it makes them feel secure and safe, or something of that nature. And like I said, these people just blended this with sort of traditional African beliefs, and in this case was supposed to be sinister to help not get caught by Fernando.
Yeah, I think the Tommy Williams episode we spoke with, that would be where we say,
yes, we would have spoke to Fernando.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
We must try and get him on the live, Gerard. We really must. Maybe we can reach out
if the cops will let us speak to him. The cops are always.
He hasn't retired yet, has he? That's part of our dilemma for the folks at home. So we look forward to folks retiring from the police because then they're on our radar to come on as guests.
And there's a few that are coming soon.
Great. Here's an interesting question from Fish Addict. Do some use their own body parts? For example, a finger, a toe, an ear in Muti. Maybe Vincent was practicing Muti.
Fish Addict, that's a very interesting question. I've never had somebody use their own body parts as an ingredient in their stuff. So I can't say I've heard of it happening.
Yeah, interesting question. To make protesters. I heard that Muti was used in the Maracana massacre to make protesters invisible. Okay, that's it.
I think that might be tongue in cheek. It wouldn't surprise me if the miners had been using Muti, but I don't. Yeah, so you didn't make them invisible by the amount of people who passed away in that incident when they were shot.
No, clearly. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the kind of legal realities around this, the Human Tissue Act, the National Health Act. Then the state versus Moharamedi, which is case law, essentially. Is that one of the cases we discussed now? Or?
So that was a guy, I mentioned him briefly. He had been busy finalizing his training, and his sister had come to spend the night. I don't know whether he'd intentionally lured her there to spend the night, but then he, along with his teenage son, basically held her down and cut off the genital parts. And he then went off to take those parts, I think maybe to his supervisor, for lack of a better word, and was stopped by the cops. And they searched him and they found his human body parts. And then they discovered, obviously, the body. So it's interesting in that case that he was convicted and he got a life sentence, but he was appealing the life sentence, saying that words, and this is my own words, I'm not such a bad person. This was basically coming from my strong religious beliefs, and that should be taken into account for sentencing purposes. And a very good judge, Dario Dosio, who is still a judge still today, was in charge of the appeal. And he looked at various literature. So he looked at some of the literature I had written on the topic. And he said that, in the same way that the Sexual Offences Act or the Minimum Sentences Act says that your own personal beliefs or religious beliefs or cultural beliefs about sex with women is not an excuse for you to rape women. And he used that same logic to say that your beliefs about religion or spiritual practices or whatever you want to call it cannot be an excuse for you to commit criminal acts in our country. And that was not seen as a mitigating factor for someone because it was a Muti murder. In fact, it's going to be an aggravating factor. Also because this is not part of the mainstream. this is a perversion of belief systems. Otherwise, it would be like an ISIS guy saying, but I'm just a radicalized extremist. Hey, but it's because of my religion, so give me off on my sentence. No, that would be an untenable situation.
So you can't use the old Rastafarian marijuana play. Now, I'm assuming that when you give this presentation and when you're talking to professionals about this, that there's some lessons to be garnered for this and how they would apply some of this knowledge from an investigative point of view. So what are some of the investigative approaches that you would then go on to kind of specify, that should be considered when investigating cases like this?
So obviously the first step is like, what am I dealing with? Is this possibly serial? Is it possibly Muti? If it's sadistic, as I said, the wounds would be less severe. They'll be more clearly in like a patterned behavior. There'll be lots of little wounds. Sadistic tends to have a sexual theme to it. Whereas in Muti, it's very few wounds, more to the point, get in the body part. There's not going to be a rape included in a Muti murder case. I've never ever had that. There's no sexual theme. There wouldn't be pornography around the scene. In serial, obviously, it's more than one victim. Muti tends to be isolated, but even when it isn't, the mutilation would differ on body to body, because today we need a heart, tomorrow we need genitals, the next day we need breasts of a female. So even if you did have a bunch in one area, if the mutilation type was changing, we might say it's more likely to have a Muti motive. And we need to start looking in that direction of traditional healers in the area, etc., as opposed to looking for a serial murderer who might be keeping body parts, but they're going to be keeping those body parts for themselves. And of course, serial murder tends to also have a sexual element in South Africa, which would be contradictory to a Muti.
Okay. Once the parts are harvested, is the body typically just, the remaining parts of that just typically disposed of, is it?
Yeah, it's pretty much usually in our experience left with the body where the incident took place. Okay. They tend not to be buried. Of course, we're going to get exceptions. They tend not to be dismembered after that for the purposes of getting rid of the body. They just really are often just left where the actual final murder took place.
It seems strange as well then and I would imagine that then just the specific body parts that they're looking for are typically taken. It's not like a Muti victim would typically be found where everything's been harvested for kind of future use for a range of clientele, perhaps.
No, we don't get that stockpiling of body parts for, hey, maybe tomorrow somebody will phone me up for a heart. No, it tends to be, I need this today, I go out and get that. If the very next day I need something else, I go out and find a new victim and I take that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is definitely, like you say, it's a skewing and a bastardization of kind of traditional, practice. And for that reason, I imagine this is not something that's going to go away.
Now, I mean, we can convict as many of these people as we can. You'll just have people who believe it, will always believe it, and that'll keep it going, unfortunately.
Yeah, because, I mean, I don't know if you have any comments on just kind of what some of the psychological considerations are for folks that are doing this. I mean, you don't have to be you don't have to be a psychopath to be somebody that goes out and harvests body parts, I imagine.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know if anybody's ever studied them. The few Muti murderers that I've encountered did not seem to be particularly crushed by what they'd done or particularly remorseful. But it gets a bit more complicated when people are doing something for some kind of belief system they have. Is it possible that some of these people are psychopaths? Yes, absolutely possible. Is it possible that some of them are not because of this linking it to the belief system? Yes. So I think it can be a yes and a no, and it'll depend on case-to-case basis. Okay.
Sandra Kloppers has dropped us a comment here, Gerard. The worst case I did happened in Ikopo. The father was an alcoholic, and he sold his 4-year-old daughter to an Ntagati. Just check the spelling there. The autopsy showed she was alive when certain parts were removed. Again, which we discussed.
Yeah. I mean, that's horrific. And pathologists can determine that because of what the wound looks like. You know, if someone is dead, the heart is stopped, and then you cut off their head or their breast, because there's no heart pumping, there won't be blood coming oozing into the wound. So you'll typically see that wound, it has a very bright yellow look to it because that's the fat, typically, and there is no blood pushing into the wound. So it is quite easy for forensic pathologists to determine that this person was alive when this was done and this person was dead when that was done.
Okay. In this particular example, and I mentioned the fact that you sent me your horrendous PowerPoint presentation, but it's one of those cases where it would actually be interesting to be able to look at some of the very graphic images, because you can see how clear it is, the different types of mutilation, etc. There's just one image I wanted to ask you about, which I saw, which was a couple sitting on the stoop of their what looked like kind of a fairly informal rural shed, and there's a little kid in front of them that's been decapitated and the body is clear, but they just sitting so casually on the step with this dismembered child sitting in front of them.
Yeah, it's the kind of photograph that people would take of their family, but the child would be sitting happily on the mom's lap. Except here you got a child whose head's off, stomach, torso's cut open, arms and legs next to them. And that was actually a photograph taken by the police. Now, why they took that photograph like that, I do not know. But the background to that case is that this particular guy was the father of that child. He was a self-styled traditional healer. In other words, he didn't get a calling. So most traditional healers, you get a calling to go and become a traditional healer. And the more you delay it and avoid it, the more things end up going wrong in your life until you just give in and go and do it. So that's how it normally works. You get that calling, but he didn't. He just decided for himself he wants to be a traditional healer. And then decided, well, if I kill my own child, it'll make me a very powerful traditional healer. So he and his wife and the little child went off ostensibly for a walk in the forest. And then when they got to the secluded spot, he said to the wife, if you don't help, I'm going to kill you. And she then helped. You can have your own comments and criticism on that. They killed the child and then obviously snuck it back. And then when the community realized, but these people, they went off with their child, the child doesn't come back, they give them vague answers, they called the police, and the police found the remains of the child inside the house and then brought it out for some God alone knows reason to have a photograph taken. So he was convicted, and she, I think, turned state's witness and was not prosecuted because it was deemed to be under duress of her own life. Now, again, you can have your own things about a woman being able to do that to their child. How could they? But if the law felt that she was forced to participate in that process, she would not be prosecuted.
Yeah. Have you ever had the opportunity to, Marlene's asked the question here, how would you profile a Muti murderer specifically? Have you ever done kind of a formal profile on somebody who is accused of this particular crime or guilty of this particular
That's crime? Actually one of the last slides I think I have in my whole presentation is can you profile it? You can't profile it in the traditional sense because the actions on the crime scene are not coming from the thoughts of that individual. So when a serial murderer goes out and rapes, murders, and mutilates, it's coming from that inner fantasy. But here you have the instruction of the traditional healer to the other person, go out and do this. And if he hadn't got that instruction on that day, he wouldn't have gone out and killed anybody. So it's not the crime scene isn't a reflection of your inner thoughts, but you profiled in the sense of, can we classify whether this could be a muti or a serial or some other kind of murder where there's mutilation? Which one of those three could it be? And then, of course, that would alter the direction of the investigation depending on what you thought. So it is kind of profiling, but it's not profiling to understand what was going on in the head of the person. It's more profiling to understand what kind of crime is it. Therefore, of course, who do we think we should be focusing on?
Oh, sorry about that. Let me drink a little bit of
water. All right, Paul.
What I wanted to ask you about is price, cost.
Oh.
The money, the exchange of money, because this is an aspect of it. What kind of amounts of money have you come across, in this area?
So again, it'll vary from person to person. I've heard, definitely a few $1,000, 5,000 Rand for a smaller body part, up to 10,000 Rand. I suppose you can charge whatever you think the person's prepared to pay.
Now, 10,000 Rand, just to put that in perspective, would be what, about $500? Yeah.
Yes, $500-600 now, I think, with the current exchange rate.
Yeah, okay. So this is not, I mean, this is not huge amounts of money that are exchanging hands. This is...
for those people, it's a lot of money.
Sure.
If you are, but for us, it's not like we think of that and that's peanuts for that.
Fair enough. Okay. I think we can go through some of the questions that we've still got. We're 10 minutes past 9, so we've been at it for 70 minutes. I think we can carry on for a little longer, Gérard. It's very nice to see that you being in Canada, the link is great. It's nice. Not much difference from when you're down the road. So that's a good discover tonight. I've heard that, okay, here we go. Let's see. Leslie, I've heard that foreskins from Xhosa bush circumcisions are used for Muti. Any truth, perhaps?
I've never heard that personally.
Okay.
I can't say.
Okay. Leslie asks, I've heard that body parts usually need to come from a pure child, hence the younger girls being targeted more often. Have you experienced more younger girl cases? What profile would you say you've come across most typically, or is it just a range?
I would say adult females, to be honest with you. I've heard the rumors like, to cure AIDS, you have to have sex with a virgin child. But in terms of Muti stuff, the idea of a pure child, I kind of think they're just going to get what they can get. They might tell the person, oh, this is a pure child, but whether it really is, I think it's more they're going to get whoever is convenient for them.
Ishara actually has asked a good question here, which I should have brought up. But I think it's a good, relevant question to ask you. Do you know anything about the Charles Muti case where the torso was stuffed into a bag and thrown into the River Thames? Now, I believe that you actually were consulted on this particular case.
Yes, that was, it was the week before or after the 9/11 Twin Towers in 2001, in New York, where the planes flew into that. That's why I didn't get a lot of media attention. But a little boy's torso was found in the Thames River, clearly a boy of African descent, head off, I think his arms and legs were cut off. And I think he just had a pair of orange shorts on. And they fished the little boy out. And of course, the big question is, who is this little boy? Is it part of some ritualized process? And they did some amazing groundbreaking forensic work, looking at everything from the pollen inside the little boy's lungs, the contents of his bones, what minerals were in his bones, which they actually traced this little boy's origin, that he'd been in London for about a week before he died. They could tell that from the various pollens inside of his lungs. Through the bone analysis, they could tell that he'd grown up in this part of Nigeria. I think they did eventually convict one or two people that smuggled him into the country, but they never convicted the people who committed the murder. And we never formally identified the little boy as far as I know. So the investigators, Will O'Reilly was the lead investigator, had come out with his supervisor to South Africa back then to speak to people such as myself and other people who had knowledge of these types of murders to see if that might help them. And also they got Nelson Mandela to do an appeal that anybody who had information should come forward to assist the police, and he very graciously he did that. So, fascinating case.
Absolutely. Okay, Gérard. Well, I mean, unless there's anything we've not covered in our discussion, unless you've got anything to add, what have we not spoken
One last
about?
thing, perhaps.
Yeah.
The issue of staging. We've mentioned staging before, which is when one person tries to make a crime look like a different crime. So typically, it's like a husband who kills his wife, and he wants to make it look like it was a hijacking or a housebreaker. We've had that quite a few times in South Africa with Muti murders, where a person wants to make it look like a Muti murder to obviously detract attention from them. And the particular case that was from early 2000s that my colleague Elmarie Myberg worked on is where the body of an adult female was found sort of dumped on the side of the road in an open field, no head, no breasts, and no external parts of the genitals. You could see very clearly those were all taken post-mortem. And there were bullet wounds in the torso. So, of course, initially the concern was, is this a Muti murder? Elmarie went out and said, no, I don't think so, because we typically don't have the victim completely naked in a Muti case. We don't have, I can't recall ever a gunshot wound in a Muti case. These body parts were removed post-mortem, which on its own isn't enough to say it couldn't be Muti. And the body was killed in one place and relocated and left at another place. They then identified the young lady through fingerprints. She was actually a member of the South African police from, I think, I think from Loate police station, actually, where that other Muti murder case occurred. And they went to a house where they recovered the remainders of the body parts. Long story short, domestic violence incident. Boyfriend shot her while she was lying down on the bed with her service pistol, and then realized, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. Cut off the body parts and left the body, hoping that people would think it is a Muti murder, and of course the attention would then be taken away from him, and he was successfully convicted of that murder.
Yeah, there's actually some great forensics on that case, wasn't there? How they went about kind of quite quickly disproving his claims.
Yeah, because then he claimed that she had attacked him and he killed her in self-defense. But they were able to show that from a ballistics point of view, she'd been lying down on the bed when he had actually shot her. So, you can't alter forensics. Yeah, forensics makes it very difficult to lie if you're doing your forensics properly.
Exactly. Sure. Okay, well, we've answered everyone's questions, Gerard, pretty much. And we've covered what folks were discussing. What's your final take on this? And what should, it's quite a unique crime to this part of the world for a start. But yeah, again, it's one of those ones that's difficult to kind of mitigate against completely.
Absolutely. I mean, whenever you're dealing with things, it's like domestic violence, drunk driving culture. You have to shift the culture slowly with time. I think nowadays, compared to when I was a young man, the attitude towards drunk driving is quite different. You still get a lot of people who do it, but a lot of people look down upon it. You actually get into a car. How can you do that? So we have to change the culture, the beliefs around it. Same things about domestic violence. We need people in the community to speak out against this type of behavior, from religious leaders to politicians, etc. But on the other side of it, you also have to make sure that you catch these people as soon as possible to show that if you do this, you're going to get caught. That kind of goes for most murders, but definitely you need to shift the attitudes, and then, of course, make sure people think that if I do this, I'm going to get caught and spend the rest of my life in jail, and it's not worth it.
Yeah. And again, I do just want us to underline the fact that traditional medicine in sub-Saharan Africa is very much a common part of daily life and a very positive aspect of people's lives in 99.9% of the cases. And, what these really are considered witchcraft and are absolutely condemned by the traditional healing community.
Yep, indeed.
Indeed. Gerard, thank you very much for taking us through. If you have any other further questions, guys, the one thing we're going to be trying to add to our little to our toolkit as we're bringing you more and more content is a few strictly Q&A episodes. So once we've gathered up with Bax, who once again has been monitoring the chat tonight, so thanks for that, Bax. Once we put together a nice series of questions, then we'll do some special Q&A episodes as well that we'll drop to just help fill up the weekends with some great true crime content. So if you tune out from the live and you've got a question that pops into your mind on this particular subject, please do make a note, pop the question onto our page, and we'll make a note of it and possibly incorporate it into a future Q&A episode. I wanted to just have a look at I put some new stuff. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for the support, really. And to do that, I wanted to show we're up to 24. There's our live subscriber counter, up to 24,000 subscribers. Our next aim, obviously, is really to push it all the way up to 100,000. So please, guys, do share the love, share the podcast with friends, family, other true crime fans that you may be aware of. And of course, we do the live on Tuesday at 8 p.m. And then we also been flighting some of our documentary series that we've been playing. This week, we're going to be dropping an episode on Caesarean kidnapping. So we've got a documentary which we discussed fairly recently on the live. So if you want to see that kind of unpacked in more detail in one of our documentaries, Essay Serial, check out that on Thursday morning. Yeah, I mean, any final comments, any final words, Gerard? I mean, there you are in Canada. I mean, When do you start crime busting Canada side? That's the big question.
No, I'm more into preventing crime nowadays with the work I do. So that's already started.
What is the daily grind there, Gérard? What exactly will you be contributing to Canadian society?
Well, coming to the office every day, which is an unusual thing for me. Meetings, consulting on threat cases where people are usually in the workplace environment where they're worried about somebody who's done something that makes them very anxious, whether it's a customer or an employee, to training on how to do risk assessments and threat assessments, to helping develop new tools for assessing violence risk, stalking, domestic violence, honor-based violence, etc. So that's kind of what my life is like now. Yeah.
Well, we must just bear in mind when it's going to be worthwhile for us to throw some of the daily grind into an episode or two, and hopefully you'll be on the lookout for some great guests that side as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gérard. It's been lovely. I missed you last week. I really did. I was glad you're settled though, and we're back into the groove Tuesday nights. We'll see you again this time next week. Hit the like button if you enjoyed tonight's episode. Please do subscribe. Please do become a member. This new media world is all about supporting the channels that you love and enjoy so that we can continue to bring you great content and continue to get this. Where is it? This. How's my finger? Yeah. This ticker ticking up and up. 100,000 by the end of the year. That's the plan, guys. Hey?
And happy Canada Day to all the Canadians. It's their Independence Day today. So
you see, you left that right till the end. Happy Canada Day, everybody. That's our so now that we're a Canadian / South African podcast, it's important for us to remember these things. Maybe I'm gonna have to get like a Canadian flag in the background somewhere to show my solidarity. Thanks, Gérard. Have a lovely rest of your day. It's the middle of the day for you there. I'm gonna
12:22.
Hey?
I'm gonna go have lunch now.
Yeah, go have some lunch. Grab a. When you left me a message earlier, like I said, I heard you immediately trudging through the snow. So you went from the cold to the cold, isn't it?
No, it's midsummer right now, actually.
Oh, well, you said you were trudging through snow. Were you lying? Okay, you were kidding.
I thought it was being sarcastic.
Okay, no, well, today's the day for things to just go over Paul's head, I think. All right, Thanks, Gérard. Great as always.
Bye, everybody.
See you again next week. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Yes. And don't forget to, just trust nobody, okay? That's the most important takeout from every episode. We'll see you next week, guys.
I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.